for lesson 4 notes, so you should have those open. And this is Rivalry in North America. We left off in the last lesson on number 11. So that's where we're going to pick up. I also have our text here to the side that I will be reading to get some more information from. And we are going to go down here. And we are looking for the question, what did the French do to protect their claims in the Ohio Valley? And so that is going to begin here in the 3rd paragraph. So I will read. To protect their claims in the valley, the French built a chain of forts from Lake Ontario south to the Ohio River. The British responded by starting to build a fort in what is now western Pennsylvania. Before they could finish, the French seized the site. On it, they built their own fort, calling it Fort Duquesne. And let's pause there for a moment and we can get part of our answer here, if not all of it. Yes, we can get all of it here. So what did the French do to protect their claims in the Ohio Valley? And so it begins right away, to protect their claims in the valley. They, here we go, built a chain of forts from Lake Ontario to the Ohio River. And then the second part here, there's a long answer and then there's a simpler answer. So we're going to talk about the long answer first. Then that's the second part of the paragraph, is that the British started to build a fort, but then the French seized that site and on it they built Fort Duquesne. So they seized the site in Pennsylvania where Great Britain was building a fort of their own. And then they built a fort and it was called Fort Duquesne. Now, Duquesne is a French word, so it looks really weird, but it said Duquesne, like I've been saying. And you can see there in the textbook too, it gives you that phonetic way of saying it, Duquesne. And we're going to be seeing this fort a couple times. You will need to know the name of this fort. So first of all, I also want to remind you that PA is Pennsylvania. Although on the colonies test, almost everybody got the abbreviations right. So that means that I should expect you to be able to know what those abbreviations are when I ask you. And then also GB, we've talked a little bit about this, is for Great Britain. So once again, though, if you are going to have trouble remembering that PA is Pennsylvania, then type in Pennsylvania when you put your answer. And if you are going to forget GB means Great Britain, then type in Great Britain is your answer, in your answer, okay? Next, we're going to be looking for define militia. Again, this is a kind of a weird looking word. Militia is how you say it. And excuse me, you're going to also see that phonetically written over here in the text as well. So I'm going to begin reading. In spring 1754, the governor of Virginia sent a militia, and again, here it is, militia, a military force made up of ordinary citizens to drive out the French. Leading this force was a young Virginian. His name was George Washington. So militia, and we're going to actually add a little bit here to you. Add a little bit more to it than what you see here. So a military force made up of ordinary citizens is that definition that the text gives. So we're going to include that part, but then we're also going to add to it that they volunteer to fight in emergency situations. So they don't have an army in the colonies right now. And so they need people to volunteer to fight. So these are ordinary citizens. They're not actually in the army. They decide that they're going to help fight. And the good thing about this is that most colonists owned their own weapons. So they were able to use their own weapons when they volunteered to fight. And they would not always fight. They could choose when they were going to be involved or not. And again, militia is a term that you're definitely going to need to know. We're going to see more about militia as we move forward. Now, in that same paragraph, we actually got the answer to number 13 as well. Who led the Virginia military? Excuse me, the Virginia militia. And our answer was here, George Washington. So this is kind of the first time that we're actually seeing George Washington. And he was a young man at this time, about 23 years old or so. And his job was actually a land surveyor. So land surveyor, what he does is measure the land, and then they can kind of determine what can be built on that land. And so that was George Washington's job, was a land surveyor. But he was also part of the militia. So he was volunteering to fight in these emergency situations. And we're going to read on here to find number 14. What was George Washington's mission? And so we're going to continue here. After marching to Fort Duquesne, Washington set up a small fort of his own nearby. He called it Fort Necessity. Washington's outpost soon came under attack by the French and their Native American allies. This combined army won the battle and forced Washington's soldiers to surrender. The French later released the soldiers, who returned to Virginia. So George Washington's mission was to march to Fort Duquesne and then set up a fort of his own nearby. And he called it Fort Necessity. And now the reason why it was called Fort Necessity was because they needed a fort. So they built it out of necessity. They had to have something for defense. And then they attacked the French. George Washington, however, and his men were forced to surrender. Now, again, I have some initials in here, an abbreviation in here. And that is for George Washington. So GW is George Washington. They were forced to surrender. Now, this is kind of a big deal because it's the first mission that George Washington has been given here in the militia. And number 15 is asking, how did the British colonists feel about Washington after his defeat? And so the answer may not be what you expect it to be. I'm actually going to make this screen a little bit bigger here for a second so we can look at this part here, this little caption that's also in the textbook, if you had the textbook out in front of you, that says, although Washington suffered defeat at Fort Necessity, the colonists viewed him as a hero who had struck the first blow against the French. Okay, so they saw him as a hero. He took this first attempt at attacking the French, which was a big deal because remember, they're not using a real army in the colonies right now. They're using volunteers, people who, yes, know how to use a gun and own a gun, but they're farmers, they're blacksmiths. They're, shopkeepers. They're not soldiers. So this is a big deal that he had this mission. And from this point forward, we're obviously going to see a lot more of George Washington. When we build an army, he will become the general, the commander of the army. And then, of course, he will eventually become the first president of the United States. So he's going to continue to build up this lifetime of achievements that begin here at Fort Necessity and attacking the French. And I'm going to move forward to our next page to get us ready for the next question. And now we're looking under this heading, Native American Allies. And the question that we're looking for is, why did the French and English want assistance from the Native Americans? So I'll begin reading. As the conflict got underway, the French and the British both sought Native American help. The French had a big advantage. They already had many Native American allies. Native Americans generally distrusted the British and their hunger for land. In contrast, the French were more interested in fur trading than in land. French trappers and fur traders often married Native American women. French missionaries built relationships with Native Americans, and some chose to convert to Catholicism. For these reasons, Native Americans helped the French and raided the British settlements. So we have some of our information here, just looking to see how far we can go. Okay, so why did the French and the English want assistance from the Native Americans? So they both sought Native American help for getting control of North America. It doesn't specifically say that here, but remember, that's what we're fighting over, is to get control of North America. And the French have an advantage over the English or over the British. Remember, that is the same thing. Okay, so British is really what it says there in the text, but either one is correct. I'm just going to add this in here to remind you of that. Okay, so an advantage that the French have over the British. Let's see here. The French had a big advantage. They already had many Native American allies. And once again, Native American NA, Native American allies. And the reason why they had many Native American allies is because, in general, the Native Americans did not trust the British. But why? Number 3, why did the Native Americans generally distrust the British? And here it is. And we're going to rephrase this a little bit. They generally distrusted the British because of their hunger for land. And so the British wanted to take the land and then end up ultimately destroying it because they farmed and they lumbered. So in order to farm, they have to clear the land away. So that means they have to cut down all the trees. Well, if they're cutting down all the trees, they're also lumbering. Okay, so they plan to continually use the land, but they're going to destroy what's already there, which are the forests, basically. And this is something that the Native Americans use greatly, is the forests. They rely on the forests for hunting and for their food and for making clothes. Okay. Now, the Native Americans often ended up helping the French and raided the British settlements for a few different reasons. Because you might think like, well, why would the Native Americans help the French? Don't they want to destroy their land too? Well, not so much, right? Here, the French are more interested in trading than in the land itself. I'm going to actually kind of highlight everything that we're looking for here. Okay, so the French were more interested in fur trading than in the land. They were trappers and traders themselves for the most part, the French. So they didn't actually want to take over the land and destroy it. They wanted to just use the resources of the land along with the Native Americans. So they needed the woods for trapping and trading. They didn't want to cut down the woods. So they both had this common need for the land, the French and the Native Americans. And so that's why Native Americans many times helped the French against the British. That's one reason. The other reason here is that French traders and trappers often married Native American women. And so they then followed the Native American customs. They assimilated or adapted into that culture. They showed respect for the culture of the Native Americans. And so again, that built this relationship of trust with the French. And then the last one that's also here is that French missionaries built relationships with Native Americans. And so a missionary is a person who spreads a religion around. And so in this case, the French mostly are Catholics, which are Christian, remember. So Catholicism is a form of the word Catholic. Okay, so they converted to Catholicism because of French missionaries, that they taught the Native Americans about Catholic traditions and Catholic faith and Catholic beliefs. And so then many Native Americans converted or changed into also believing in Catholicism and Christianity. So that's quite a bit to write. I'm going to pause there while you get that all put in. going to add in here too about they built relationships based on trust and respect. Okay, and then we are moving on to the next part that is asking, what was the Iroquois Confederacy? This is number 5. So I'm going to leave that there in case you still are typing that in, and I'm going to begin to read. To counter the threat of the French and their Native American friends, the British colonists tried to make a treaty with the Iroquois. The Iroquois Confederacy was the most powerful group of Native Americans in eastern North America. At that time, the Confederacy included 6 nations: the Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Tuscarora. Delegates or representatives from 7 colonies met with the Iroquois leaders at Albany, New York in June 1754. The Iroquois refused an alliance or partnership with the British. They did, however, promise to remain neutral, that is, to take no side. Okay, so we are going to flip here to the next page, and the Iroquois Confederacy. So I've got this kind of broken into a few different pieces here. The Iroquois Confederacy was the most powerful group of Native Americans in eastern North America. So we're talking about along the area of the 13 colonies, right? And once again, NA is for Native Americans. So the nickname, it doesn't really come out and clearly say what the nickname is, but it does include it here in the answer. So they included 6 nations, and happens to be their nickname is the 6 Nations. And then the Iroquois nations, so the groups of Native Americans that are part of the Iroquois Confederacy, the 6 nations, are the Mohawk, the Seneca, the Cayuga, the Onondaga, the Oneida, and the Tuscarora. Okay, so we have our 6 groups of Native Americans that make up the Iroquois Confederacy. Their nickname is the 6 Nations, and they are the most powerful group of Native Americans in eastern North America. So which country did the Iroquois support? Now, it said here that they had representatives who met with the Iroquois Confederacy, representatives from the colonies, and they did not agree to an alliance with the 13 colonies with the British. Okay, remember, it's the British who are in control of the 13 colonies, but they promised that they would remain neutral. So this is kind of a trick question because the answer is no one. They promised to remain neutral, to not take sides. So neutral is a vocabulary word that you'll need to know. So do make sure that you put that part in there with it, unless you know what neutral is. If you know what neutral is, then you don't have to write it in there, okay? So our next one is the Albany Plan of Union. And number 7, what was the Albany Plan of Union? And let me just make sure that we've got what we need here. Okay, yes. So the Albany delegates also talked about how the colonies might work together more closely against the French. They decided to adopt Benjamin Franklin's Albany Plan of Union for a united colonial government. To form a colonial government, each colony would have to give up some of its powers. Not one colonial assembly was willing to do so. Disappointed, Franklin wrote, "Everybody cries. A union is absolutely necessary, but when they come to the manner and form of the union, they are perfectly distracted." So the Albany meeting failed to unify the colonists. Meanwhile, the conflict between the British and the French expanded into a full-scale war, the French and Indian War. So the Albany Plan of Union was written by Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin's Albany Plan of Union for a united colonial government. That was the whole plan, to unite the colonies. And so they came up with this phrase, unite or die. I'll leave that here for a minute. Actually, I'm going to move away from that for a minute and then I will come back to it, okay? So I wanted to just show you a little bit closer up here that this is that same little image that I have there in the notes, and I will just read to you this caption here that says, "America's first political cartoon, drawn by Benjamin Franklin in 1754, promoted his Albany Plan of Union. Each section represents a colony. The New England colonies are combined as one section," right here, NE for New England. What warning? Nope, I'm not going to continue to read that part. Okay, so then we have NY is for New York, NJ is for New Jersey, P is for Pennsylvania, M is for Maryland, V is for Virginia, NC North Carolina, SC South Carolina, G is for Georgia. So each segment is part of this snake, right? And you see that it's kind of divided there. So I guess I will kind of pose this question. What warning does the cartoon convey about approaching the war with France? And as a whole, a snake can be pretty powerful, but if you cut it into pieces, it's going to die, right? That's the whole point. If we remain united as 13 colonies, we will be able to fight against France. But if we remain separate, then we're not going to be able to survive. So we either have to unite together or we will die, is what that's saying, okay? So again, written by Benjamin Franklin, a plan for uniting a colonial government, that one government for all the colonies, because right now they work as 13 separate governments. And so he says we have to come together to work together against France, or we will all die. So unfortunately, the Albany Plan of Union failed. And the reason is here that they had to give up some of their powers because they couldn't all continue to govern themselves separately. They had to govern together as a group, but they were afraid if they joined together as one, that then they would really lose power, and they did not want to do that. So none of the colonies was willing to give up their power in order to actually unite together under one government. It's going to take time to get to this point, and they will. They'll eventually get there. I mean, we're a country today and we have one government today, so we'll get to that point, but it's not going to be easy to get there. It's going to take a lot of fighting and a lot of debate and a lot of back and forth, and they will finally get to that point, but not yet. So number 9, this answer is not in the text. Why was the Albany Plan of Union important? Even because it failed. Like, you're thinking, well, why are we talking about this if it didn't even work? Well, the reason why it's important is because this was the first attempt to unite and form one government as one country. So it's definitely a stepping stone, and it's a piece of our history that needs to be remembered. And again, also out of this came the first political cartoon drawn by Benjamin Franklin. And so even that itself is kind of a big deal, that we're talking about this plan to unite or die. And I will let you go ahead and get that information typed in there. And this takes us up to the next heading called the French and Indian War. So once again, we're going to pause for today. So make sure that you, if you've already have it saved in your U.S. History Drive, that's great. Make sure that you do continue to know where it is so that you'll be able to come back to it again for the next part of the lesson.